Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. I am the co-host Kyle Anslone, and I'm joined by the other host Will Porter as we kick off the second week of the show. Like always, we will have episodes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. We got a lot of really good stuff planned for the week ahead, as Friday will be the 19th anniversary of 9/11, so it's definitely going to be a good opportunity to look back at that, what happened, and how really the wars that have shaped mine and Will's entire lives have been a consequence in large part of that day, or at least that's a very important day to that. So we got that coming up on Friday, but we got a lot of great news to cover on today's show and Wednesday's show, including the trial of Julian Assange and these newest sensational claims of the statement of Donald Trump, and then even more important, I think, the reaction to it. But Will, how's it going? How you feeling the second week of the show starting here?
Yeah, man, I'm good. We made it through a first week without any catastrophic issues or failures. I think I'm glad we've kind of prepared a little bit to, on the technical end, there's quite a bit more to juggle with this video show. But yeah, I think it's, coming along.
Right, and that is just another thing me and Will are continuing to work to improve and figure out what needs to be done to bring the top quality shows. We're definitely looking at improving the audio quality, especially in the podcast feed that comes out. So hopefully that gets better. But we're doing the best we can for now. Y'all could support the show first of all by telling it to people. We're only on the fourth episode here, so the more you're talking about and sharing it, the more it'll get into people's feeds, and hopefully they'll check it out for the first time. Make sure you're subscribing to the show somewhere. It has pretty much its own feed, so if you're a former foreign policy focused listener, you switch over to the conflicts of interest feed now, although I will still put the episodes out on the foreign policy focused feed until people switch over. That way, everybody's listening to the show that wants to listen to it. And the big thing is subscribe to the YouTube channel, because the more people we have subscribed, the more features we could unlock, and we're planning on doing a lot to get a little bit more interactive with the audience. So Will, very excited for the show we have here today. If you're ready, we'll just get talking about it.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the first thing we have to talk about is this super sensational, the newest left-wing outrage of Donald Trump. The Never Trumpers are all rallying around this story from Jeffery Goldberg that was published at the Atlantic, where he claims that he has unnamed sources who everybody is assuming to be Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, saying that Donald Trump said a whole bunch of disrespectful things about dead American veterans, particularly from World War I and the Vietnam War. And I really didn't want to cover his story a whole lot because for the reasons we're going to talk about in a minute, I don't really think there's a particular reason we should put a whole lot of stock in it. And also, I think it's a stupid thing to be outraged about. But Will, I'll let you, if you have anything to add to like the actual story that Goldberg put out, or any important details that you think people actually need to know that I missed.
Yeah, I mean, there was it was quite a long story. There were a lot of claims he made about just like these various things Trump has said throughout his term. I think he had reportedly denigrated these dead American soldiers in a French cemetery he was supposed to visit and called them suckers and losers or something. That was one of the claims. And another claim is that he said bad things about John McCain. And so like that's sort of like the general gist of this story is that he said bad things about dead veterans and then as well as John McCain.
Right.
So
yeah, and so this, it definitely isn't the kind of thing that we usually cover, but the reaction to it has been astounding. But I guess before we get to the reaction, I want to look at this Glenn Greenwald article for just a minute, because I think he made some really important points in here just about what happened in this story and how overall it relates to kind of the problem that we have with fake news and in journalism. And what happens is, they put out this story with super sensational claims in an unnamed source, right? So again, nobody knows exactly who Jeffrey Goldberg's source is, but people assume that it is John
John
Kelly,
Kelly.
Although, and then even Greenwald points out here, there's actually two other people who would have been present at least at one of these events, and those being Sarah Huckabee Sanders and John Bolton, and they both deny that this is accurate. So even though there's two people going on record saying that it's not accurate, they still apparently outweigh that with these unnamed sources. The other thing I think worth mentioning, because Sarah Huckabee Sanders and John Bolton, I don't think are necessarily Trump allies. Now, some other statement, I don't know if it was through the Goldberg piece or something else that came out, but this might have actually been the Michael Cohen book. Where they're claiming that that Kim Jong-un at a summit was like making eyes or like winked at Sarah Huckabee Sanders, like, obviously trying to like hit on her and be like, hey girl, I'm interested. And so after that, apparently the report is that Trump said to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, like, we're going to send you over there to take one for the team. Now, like, obviously in the Me Too era, this is an extremely inappropriate joke, although you have to imagine that this is how Donald Trump, operates in the workplace. So not all that surprising. The other thing, so again, just to point out that I don't think these are two people who are actually going to go out of their ways necessarily to defend Trump on something if they don't have to. And so them coming out and saying no to this makes me think that, that's a pretty big hole in the whole plot here. The other thing that, Greenwald points out is that, the real problem is that then other media sources will also confirm this story with unnamed sources. And so it's, very interesting now that you've had, I think, Fox News and the AP come out in this case and also have unnamed sources. How do we know that they're not the same unnamed source? Because that certainly wouldn't confirm it, right? Well, if the, same, unnamed person points something out. So, I know that you're a little bit more of a writer than I am, and you went to journalism school and everything. I just wanted to ask you, like, on the standard here, like, how can like somebody with an unnamed source confirm something with another unnamed source? And just, is this just really sloppy journalism, as Greenwald is pointing out here?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree that like the term confirm should not be used if you're still talking about unnamed. Like you might say corroborate or something that like, oh yeah, that was corroborated by another unnamed source, but you would not say that's confirmed. Typically you reserve confirm for something that's on the record. And yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg, he cites, I think, several different like aides and officials, but literally none of them are willing to go on the record with any of this, which, is, I think, a little bit cowardly, to be hurling these kind of allegations and to, I don't know, to just let the Atlantic magazine, launder them for you without putting your name on them.
Right. And this isn't a case, at least as far as I could tell, where they're actually concerned about facing like criminal indictment or something like that.
No.
Where, if you had like Snowden or Chelsea Manning who wanted to try to remain anonymous and leak without, giving out personal details and stuff like that, you could understand it because, Chelsea Manning's been through all kinds of torture and Snowden's exiled to Russia. Right. So that kind of made sense. But I think Greenwald points out here, the worst thing that Trump could possibly done to any of these people is send out a mean tweet about them. And so from a journalist standpoint, like if somebody's not willing to use their name for something that is essentially gossip, do you have an obligation then not to run that story or to like very, very clearly point out that this really belongs at TMZ and not the Atlantic?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the Atlantic should have run this. Like, I think they should have like at least had one person on the record. And I mean, like they do cite something that is on the record. They do cite Trump's previous like denigration of John McCain, something about, oh, he's not a war hero. I prefer people who are not captured. Trump did say that on record. Like he did, I think back in like 2015 when he was still running initially before he was even elected. And so there's some stuff that I guess I don't really doubt in this, but like, yeah, if you don't have a single name source to go on the record to confirm any of this, then no, I don't think you should run a story like this at all. Like you should at least have somebody who's willing to, put their name by this.
Right. I thought that Greenwald maybe overstated it in the piece a little bit, but he did say like, hey, it's not like out of completely where Donald Trump is to say something like this. Right. It's not crazy that he would have said something at least along these lines. I don't know about the exact quotes they put out there because they're so sensational. But if that was like, what John Kelly, a veteran, took of what Trump said dismissively about a veteran, then that I guess would completely surprise me. However, as you point out, there's no reason that we should even be discussing this, or that it should even have, been run at all in the first place. So now I want to talk about the reaction to this a little bit, because I think this is where it gets really important, where everybody says that this is the kind of thing that disqualifies Donald Trump to be president, including the Libertarian Party, who said, yes, of course, Donald Trump said it, and of course he'll deny it after 4 years. He shouldn't. It shouldn't be shocking anymore. This is what the GOP has become. Hashtag Trump hates our military. And so basically they take this angle that really promotes militarism. It's, I guess, a little bit less shocking to me that the Biden campaign and that the liberals are doing it. But, I'm seeing a lot of even progressives fall for this, and that, now that Donald Trump's hating on the military, everybody, just rallies around to them like it's 9/11 or something, and is like, oh, we have to pat all these people on the back, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened. We're talking about people in Vietnam and World War One in particular, where these are wars the U.S. didn't even have to fight. The biggest insult to any of these soldiers was, Kennedy, LBJ, or Nixon wasting their lives in Vietnam, or Woodrow Wilson wasting their life, or, them getting the Spanish flu and dying in World War One. So, that's a real problem for me. And Dave Smith, as always, just does a great job on Twitter of pointing out the problem here, and says, imagine representing libertarians and being offended that rumor has it Trump is criticized of all institutions, the U.S. military. Oh no. So it's such a good point that Dave's making, and such a failure on the part of the Libertarian Party. Well, I know you were pretty shocked by this yourself, so I was hoping to get your reaction here.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think the proper stance toward this Jeffrey Goldberg piece is to be very skeptical, to demand proof always. To see the LP just uncritically swallow this thing, just to get this like very low hanging partisan, like, personal attack on Trump. I find it kind of disgusting. It's ridiculous. Like, had they made the point they're making and said, oh, the GOP hates the military or something, and then maybe tied it in with some kind of like libertarian argument about how that's why we support ending the wars or something, I could maybe have let it slide. That, like, all right, like, I don't see why they have to take it to this weird partisan, like, personal thing on Trump. Like, but had they tied in some argument, I might have let it slide. But no, they didn't do that at all. They just purely, like, I don't know how you could distinguish if you showed me the text of that tweet and asked me who sent this tweet out, the Libertarian Party or the Biden campaign. I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. And
I would have guessed the Biden campaign. I would have assumed it was the Biden campaign. Because the LP should only be tweeting this out in response to a U.S. soldier dying overseas. U.S. soldier dies in Afghanistan. Absolutely. Hashtag Trump hates our military. We shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be dying there. That's the point the LP needs to be making. I thought I had a pretty witty reply to this thing, so I'll go ahead and say I did, the LP Twitter : and from what they're saying, let's all believe poorly sourced sensational claims from Jeffrey Goldberg. What could possibly go wrong? And so, to go back, and Glenn Greenwald and Michael Tracy do a great job of pointing this out, where they basically say that, Jeffrey Goldberg is also a sensational liar who published the claims that Saddam Hussein was linked to Al-Qaeda and involved in 9/11. And that was, such a huge part of the argument to go to war in Iraq, was linking Saddam Hussein to 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. And Greenwald goes on to point this out, that a huge number of Americans cited that as a major reason. People were really skeptical about going to Iraq, feeling like, Bush was just trying to finish off his father's thing, that it was like a personal grudge. There's arguments around oil, and they claim WMD all day. But at the end of the day, it was they could give that WMD to terrorists, and look, Saddam had already helped them. And then Michael Tracy points out that, you know, it was like this laundering through Dick Cheney, where, you know, on Meet the Press, you know, Dick Cheney was asked about Goldberg's article linking Saddam Hussein to Al-Qaeda. And Cheney's like, oh, it's a devastating article. And, you know, thought it was really important and powerful. And, you know, this is a guy that was critical to lying the nation into Iraq. And the LP is just swallowing what he says. It's unbelievable. You know, everything that somebody like him, John Bolton, Bill Kristol, can you imagine the LP retweeting something that Bill Kristol tweeted out? But like, that's like the ballpark of where they're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That is like sort of the, you know, they might as well be tweeting out a Bill Kristol tweet. Like, I don't know, it's like, can you believe how mean and terrible Donald Trump is? It's just like, if you can't distinguish it from the MSNBC, CNN, like Democrat orbit, like I think the LP is doing something wrong. I think their purpose is to sort of like sell our ideas and to differentiate us from the two major parties. You know, like they could have taken this and made it like a very, you know, easy message out of it. You know, they could have said something like, you know, like we don't always believe unverified hit pieces in the media, but the worst disrespect to our soldiers is sending them off to die in pointless wars, in criminal wars that have been backed by the both parties for decades. You know, they could have turned that into a great argument against the, you know, the fake ass media, both the, you know, the two party system and the bipartisan foreign policy. And instead what they did, they tried to do their best imitation of a Democrat. You know, like I just find that to be like, it's disgraceful. The LP should not be messaging like that, in my opinion.
Right. Well, you know, I know this isn't even the biggest flat that the LP Twitter account has caught recently, after they were like kind of jumping in and dunking on Rand Paul after he was surrounded and, you know, screamed at with his wife, you know, outside of an event. Also demanding, you know, that Rand Paul say the name of Breonna Taylor when he authored the Breonna Taylor Act. Like, there are plenty of congressmen. Like, you should like be going to your Democratic senator and going like, hey, look, this Republican authored the Breonna Taylor Act to end no-knock raids. Why the hell haven't you signed on board to this yet? And or like shame Rand Paul on something that you could shame Rand Paul on. But it just shows that these people are like just a know-nothing mob. And, you know, I actually went through and watched some of that video, and the mob was like making threats like, say her name or we'll kill you. And so, you know, he was at least in a position that if they decided to do that, there really wasn't anything he could do about it. And so to mock a man in that position from the LP Twitter account was pretty bad. But apparently whoever sent out that tweet got fired for it. I don't know if that was the same person that sent out this one, but man, isn't that a sad state of things, Will, when the you know, LP Twitter account can't even just like look at war as the first problem? You know, this is something that I've seen a lot of people point out, is that it seems like they're very determined to just pick on Donald Trump. And look, I'm fine with every negative thing that they put out about Donald Trump, as long as it's not proclaiming to believe what Jeffrey Goldberg says when he has just unnamed sources. Right. But at the same time, like, then put out an equal number of tweets about Joe Biden. He's the front runner. You have a race. You're the third party, and you're not criticizing the front runner. What the hell are you doing? It's shocking. The way that this has been handled here. And you know, this to me, I guess, because it's, you know, in a little bit more of, you know, our realm, Will, has just been like a slap in the face, really, for the libertarian take to be this on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, we have this radical philosophy. We have all these, like, you know, this unique approach to all these different social issues and stuff that, like, you know, most of the major parties aren't talking about. And, you know, I think the LP should be doing its best to constantly sell that, to constantly tell people that, hey, like, there's another option here. And all they're really doing is saying, hey, we're like the junior anti-Trump party. You know, like the Democrats are already the anti-Trump party. They're just saying we're like the junior Democrats. That's like everything the LP does seems to be trying to send out that message that, like, hey, us too. Like, we're also fashionably anti-Trump. And, like, again, like you're saying, there's all kinds of things they could hit Trump on all day, but, like, those would be things that you could also hit Biden on in both parties, and, like, you know, actually do libertarian messaging instead of just, you know, trying to be Rachel Maddow or something.
Do you have anything else to add on this, Will, or should we talk about Assange?
No, let's move on. Something more important.
Yeah, you're right. So before anybody watching the video today, I got on my free Assange hat and my WikiLeaks shirt because Assange is going back to trial this week. I think it was delayed. It was supposed to start this summer
Yeah.
because of COVID. I really don't have an idea of how Assange's health is, other than the last person I know who saw him, who made a public statement, was his partner and mother of his children, and I think a former member, if not a current member of his legal team, Stella Morris, said that he was in pain. But there's been some great, kind of reporting on this. And I got two articles up here now, one from Nozomi Hayase and the other from Jonathan Cook. And these are both at antiwar.com, and I'll make sure to put the links in the show notes page. But they do a pretty good job. I think the Hayase article does a better job of like going into the details of what Assange is currently facing. 17 counts, 175 years. The Espionage Act being used against a journalist. Whereas the the Jonathan Cook article does a much better job of going through like the past and the lies about Assange, and his work over the years has been so important, and also details how he was spied on during his time in the Ecuadorian embassy. I mean, this is a crazy scandal. People called Julian Assange paranoid and said he was a nut for claiming the U.S. was spying on him. But no, really, they were spying on him even in the women's bathroom of, his little embassy studio apartment thing he lived in for a few years. And, so all that was in there. And then, of course, the great work, Cook really highlights of Nils Melzer, who is a UN special rapporteur on torture. This guy's like a real expert on torture, and you've been around a lot of victims of torture, and he says that Julian Assange shows clear signs of prolonged psychological torture. So, Will, I'll let you jump in and add what you have here. I thought the most important thing was that we talk about it on the show today, because there's going to be updates through it about the week, and we should be talking, all of us should be talking and sharing stuff about this throughout the week, because this is just such an important trial that's, I think, going to have a lot of meat of it be coming up in the coming week.
Yeah. I mean, you did a good job summarizing some of it there. Just the, Assange situation. For people who may not remember, this is all in relation to Assange, to the WikiLeaks publication of the Iraq and Afghan war logs that were leaked by Chelsea Manning back in 2010 while she was still back in the military. She was in the army and she leaked this stuff. And so, yeah, the U.S. has now charged Julian Assange for that, and they're trying to get the U.K. to hand him over. So that's what this hearing on Monday is going to start to decide. I think they expect it to go on for a couple of weeks, so it's not like this will all happen on Monday. But the process is now resuming to see him maybe handed over to the U.S. And if we look at some of the preliminary hearings, like back earlier this year over the winter, it was pretty obviously slanted against Julian Assange. I mean, like, he was kept in this like glass cage thing, like he's like Hannibal Lecter or something, or a terrorist or whatever, where he can't hear what's going on when he's in this thing. And I believe they intend to put him back in that thing this time. And they've confiscated his legal documents. They didn't really let him confer with his lawyers and his legal counsel. And so he's kind of just like a bit like alone in all this. Like he has legal counsel, but he's not really able to like confer with them, and again, can't really hear what's even going on around him. And so, like, if that's anything to go by, then like this hearing resuming, it's not going to be very good for Assange, I think.
And on top of that, he's some level of unwell through all this, like physical health unwell. We know he had prolonged, I think, shoulder and dental issues while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, that, they never let him go see a doctor or anything. So, he can't get any of it worked on. So I'm sure all that's getting worse in prison. I don't think the maximum security Belmarsh prison in the UK is any example of, where people go to get good health care. So I'm sure he's not getting what he needs. And then, again, just all that plus the psychological torture. I'm sure, still not getting very much exposure to sunlight or just human interaction, which he desperately needs, and we all do.
Yeah. Yeah, let me tell you, dude, dental issues, like, people in the audience may have had some of those before. I've had a lot throughout my childhood and throughout my life. It can be horrifically painful, like debilitatingly painful. Like, if you have an abscess or something, I forget exactly what Assange's dental problem was, but these things can be, it's not just like a cavity or something. This could be like a, debilitatingly painful condition, dental stuff. And so just to point that out.
Right.
But in this hearing, I believe what the UK government, or excuse me, what the pro extradition side has to argue, I think it's American representatives, they have to argue that the UK has laws that are, that Assange is being charged under American laws that are compatible with laws in the UK. And so I think that's part of the major argument that the pro extradition side has to make here, is that, like, hey, we're not extraditing him on some like weird Sharia law thing, or like that's why these rules are in place, to make sure that he can't be extradited on the basis of some weird law that's totally incompatible with the UK. Unfortunately, though, the UK, I don't think has like any blanket, like, I don't think they have the equivalent of a First Amendment, like a blanket protection for the free press. And then not to mention they have something called the Official Secrets Act, which is very akin to the U.S. Espionage Act, which I think Assange is the first American, or not, he's not even American. He's the first person in the U.S. legal system to be charged under the Espionage Act, the first journalist. Even though, despite the fact he's Australian and, he was outside of the U.S. when he published this stuff.
Right. I think the first for publishing information rather than leaking it, where, right. Jeremy Hammond, John Kiriakou, Chelsea Manning, Snowden, et cetera, it's for leaking, right. But he just published it. So he's doing what the New York Times did with, and some of this, the case. So maybe if you don't mind taking a quick detour here, Will, what they're, I guess, alleging that Assange did to try to make it different from what the New York Times did. They say that he encouraged and helped Chelsea Manning with the leak, which right. There was an extensive investigation, and there's absolutely very little to no evidence that Assange actually did anything that helped Chelsea Manning leak the information. There's some allegations that he helped Chelsea Manning devise some kind of way to access the data that wouldn't compromise Manning's identity, but it wasn't helping, Chelsea access a higher level of data or more data. It was just to help that person do it in a way that's anonymous, which right. If you listen to like old interviews of Bob Perry or Seymour Hersh, that's just journalistic practices. You help your, source stay anonymous if that's what they want and that's what you could do. And so there's that. And I guess they also allege that, Julian Assange encouraged the leaking or something like that, which again, these people say that, hey, this is what we do. And so, it's very hard to differentiate what they're actually charging Assange for and what like the New York Times or the Washington Post would do. And so I don't know, that to me is just shocking, because for as much as they talk about Trump's war on journalists at CNN and Rachel Maddow, silence on Assange.
Yeah, that's right. I believe the Obama administration had actually decided, like, they declined to pursue charges against Assange because they said this very thing, that there's like the New York Times standard that, like, we can't go after this guy if he's doing something that's indistinguishable from what the Times would be doing in terms of, like just procuring and publishing information. And so, the UK government, they have to try to, or excuse me, the pro-extradition side, the prosecution in this case, has to make the argument that the UK and the US have sort of similar laws. And it seems like they're going to sort of be able to do that just on the basis of like the official secrets thing versus the Espionage Act. But as you kind of mentioned, like, I think Assange's side, his counsel are going to be arguing, like, they're going to be citing his bad health and how, the extradition could like very negatively impact that if he's being moved to like a long distance or something to another facility in the U.S. And I think they're also going to say that this is a politically motivated thing. And they're saying that like espionage inherently is political, like the espionage charges. And they're going to try to like urge the UK, I think, to not take a side in this and like, in what is inherently a political matter. And so I think that's sort of the approach they're going to take. However, I must say, I'm not that confident that like this is going to turn out good for Assange. Like, just seeing what had happened previously in the preliminary hearings, I don't see this turning out good for Julian Assange. I'm not super. I think it would be sort of unreasonable to expect that he would now get fair treatment all of a sudden after all this. So I don't know. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I definitely agree. I'm not optimistic about it. In fact, I've heard John Kiriakou even say that, or the real way we're going to save Assange is through jury nullification in the U.S. Essentially, just hope you get 1 in 12 on the jury that understands what jury nullification is and who won't vote to convict Assange. And so, I guess maybe if we run out the clock here, I'm sure that if we do get to November and the Biden administration signals to the UK that they're not very interested in going through with this, then maybe, you know, something like that could happen. I'm not sure how the politics plays out leading up to the election. Although if you talk to anybody, like, you know, on the left, this, you know, this stuff right here, the Assange, the WikiLeaks, these are the bad guys now. You know, even though he's being prosecuted for exposing George Bush era crimes, George Bush is now, you know, the good guy in their eyes, and so they really don't care. And in fact, you know, Assange has since, from their point of view, helped the Russians and helped Vladimir Putin, help Donald Trump win the election, and so now they're evil. And
it's a non-state intelligence agency or something, like Pompeo said. That's like the liberal stance on him now.
Yeah, and didn't, like, Hillary Clinton openly amused about droning the guy, so
that's right.
It's not very optimistic in a lot of ways, I guess. Although, you know, maybe the politics play out in a certain way coming up to the election here. I mean, you know, if you look at what we talked about first, the standard thing, that it seems that, you know, a large portion of the, you know, just the political in spectrum entirety, including the LP Twitter, they've called Trump derangement syndrome. And so if they're that deranged about Trump, maybe they will incorporate this in his war on journalism and take a stand on the issue, and that would be nice to see. But again, I'm not very optimistic, and Trump has certainly been worse on this than even Obama, who was a complete coward on the issue and could have, you know, just been like, full pardon for Assange. Like, thank you for exposing the war crimes that my predecessor committed, and now I'm going to take that information and try to help foreign prosecutions because they tortured a whole bunch of people. But
yeah, just to add something here before we get to the slightly better news, I will pile on to some of the worst news. At unfortunately, the People's Convention, this like very like progressive event that was held by, you know, you had all kinds of like Bernie people there.
Jimmy Dore spoke at it. Marianne Williams, I both saw them speak at it. So that's kind of the crowd.
Yeah, and like fairly big names, like you're saying too. But unfortunately, at this whole People's Convention, and they've since acknowledged this and like apologized, but the name Julian Assange wasn't mentioned a single time during this entire thing. Like they talked all about all this progressive stuff, but like couldn't find a 10 seconds to mention Julian Assange and his plight. And so I think that kind of reflects just like where he is, like where we are with, you know, Assange, and where like how important of an issue that is for, you know, a lot of people who consider themselves left or activists or progressives or whatever, unfortunately.
Well, you know, let's, I guess, just round out this conversation why mentioning this is so important, especially to like me and you, is because anybody who publishes classified information now is subject to the Espionage Act. That's a scary situation, because let me, you know, I don't count myself along the ranks of Assange or Greenwald or anything like that. However, if anybody did, you know, want to say like call me up and be like, hey, Kyle, you know, I got this important information that shows government corruption. Like, hell, I'll do everything I can to get that published. You know what I mean? That's I think what, you know, me and you are set out to do, and what the right thing to do is. But we're saying the standard that is punishable by law. And so that's definitely something we need to fight against. And again, you would just think in the age of Trump, this would be such a home run for the left or for the LP. And a lot of silence. Now, let's again switch over to the good news, I guess, Will, and talk about this court ruling that kind of vindicates Edward Snowden. So, you know, a little bit of a different whistleblower subject here. Snowden leaked to Greenwald and the Washington Post, not to WikiLeaks. However, he was assisted in getting from Hong Kong in an attempt to get to Ecuador, but they helped him get out of Hong Kong or Beijing or wherever he was and about to be arrested, and get him on a plane, which was eventually, you know, he was forced to get stuck in Russia then. But Assange was critical to helping Assange, or Assange was critical to helping Snowden get out of Hong Kong. So to talk about Snowden a little bit and just what this really means. And I saw him on Twitter saying that this was some vindication. So talk about a little bit. Well, what's happening here?
Yeah, sure. So on Thursday, we had a circuit appeals court issue a ruling, albeit, sort of 7 years after the fact now, but they've issued a ruling that basically found the NSA surveillance program that Snowden exposed, found that they've ruled that illegal. They said that was it violated the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or the FISA law, which is sort of like the foundational surveillance law in the U.S. that they use to spy on sometimes Americans, but they go through this thing called the FISA court where they have to be authorized and all this stuff. And this appeals court found in this ruling that mass bulk collection program was a violation of the FISA law, and they said it might be unconstitutional, which is kind of but that's what they deliberated. They found that it might be unconstitutional, but a definite violation of the FISA law. And another significant thing about this ruling too, I think, is they actually said that some U.S. officials who claimed that who defended this bulk collection program, that they basically lied. That these officials went around citing this one particular case where these four people in the U.S. were accused of giving money to, I think, al-Shabaab, jihadists in Somalia. And it was claimed in that case that the NSA bulk collection program played a huge role in getting their conviction. And the court in this ruling said explicitly that no, they lied about that the NSA thing did not play a role in that conviction. And so this is one of the major things they used to argue for it. And no, there's no basis for that. They said, I think the classified record doesn't reflect that. And I mean, the ruling didn't get into this, but there've been quite a few things that they've claimed that have been used to sell this bulk collection program. I think they claimed that Osama bin Laden was found because they had spied on one of his couriers or something. But that kind of turned, if you believe what Seymour Hersh reported, that no, that was actually just a Pakistani intelligence official, just he was a walk-in. He just kind of volunteered the information to the CIA, that it was not gained through some NSA thing. And then there was also, of course, James Clapper back, I think in I think it was 2013. I think it was right after Snowden had leaked this stuff. But the director of national intelligence just blatantly lied to the Senate's face and just saying no, there's no, we don't spy on Americans. There is no bulk collection. And so there's been quite a bit of lying about this program. This court ruling only addressed one of the narrow arguments for it, but I think we can point out several of the lies that have been used to justify that program, which I think they've now shut down. That's what they claim. I think last year they had that they shuttered the call records collection program, which who knows if I don't really buy that necessarily. How long did they get away with doing it in secret before we did eventually find out about it? So I think it's very possible they could just revert to doing it in secret again.
Right, and from my understanding, one of the things they do is they just get the call companies to hold the information, and then they just get massive blanket warrants to search any and all the information. So now they don't even have to hold on to it. The companies do and just give it to them anyways. And then, especially pointing out the James Clapper lie, I think, we should point out that he's been somewhat of a central figure in this whole Russiagate thing, not like John Brennan or James Comey. At least he hasn't been quite as vocal as those two, but he was in a key intelligence role at the end of the Obama administration and has, went on record and has, supported the Russiagate claims. And now this guy is found by a court to be lying in front of Congress. Well, not, I guess, in a perjury trial or anything, but a court found that. You would think that would have to start to raise some question marks, especially on, the left that's at least, according to their platform, concerned about civil liberties. Wouldn't you care a little bit about that kind of thing? But I'm guessing we're not going to see a whole lot of outrage or anything happening there.
No, I don't expect that. And this recent ruling was actually not the first time that the bulk collection program had been ruled illegal. I think in 2015 there was a different appeals court that had ruled pretty much the same thing. But in that case, I think they had just said that the Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is what they had been claiming was, that justified a lot of this bulk collection. I think they just said it doesn't authorize that kind of program. Whereas this more recent ruling, I think actually said that, no, this actually violates the FISA law. And that it's not just they didn't just sort of question whether it was authorized. They're actually saying, no, this outwardly violates the law. And so, but there have been previous court rulings that sort of like cut against this, that type of bulk collection before.
So the last thing I have for us to talk about today, Will, is kind of going back to what we were doing at the beginning of the year on the old Foreign Policy Focus show, and doing a COVID update, just because, it's been such a big story. And I want to focus on this aspect. I have a write-up here for a reason, but I know you also covered it over at RT, and we will link to that in the show notes page. But the governor of New York, who is claiming, I guess, to be the best at handling COVID, now wants to have a 4,000 police officer task force to enforce social distancing at indoor dining establishments. So I don't know. You talk about this absurdity, and then maybe we could talk a little bit more about COVID in general.
Yeah, sure. And like, I do think, unfortunately, I think this is something we're kind of going to see more of. Like, we can kind of look forward to seeing this more in the future, that like these sort of like more like the convergence of policing and the pandemic, where you're going to have these like task forces enforcing social distancing and, mask wearing and all this stuff. I mean, we've definitely seen that already. We've seen plenty of that happening in the US, and then even like way more so overseas. If you look at like the UK and Australia, where the police will come and kick down your door over something you posted on the internet. We just saw that happen like last week quite a bit, where in Australia they had this rally they were planning where cops were coming and kicking down people's doors for promoting that march on the internet. And so unfortunately, I think that is sort of something we're going to see more of in the U.S., especially somewhere like New York, where you've had like a really bad outbreak. It is very ironic that Cuomo tries to sell himself as like some master COVID eradicator or something, when his state was the worst hit. They had the worst outbreak in the whole country, and partly I think because of his policies, because of the whole nursing home thing, forcing nursing homes to take COVID positive patients. He wasn't the only one.
Look at like NYC in itself, it's like one of the worst hit areas on the entire planet. This includes countries like Yemen, where we've systematically destroyed the healthcare infrastructure. This jackass had an entire the largest medical ship in the entire world brought into his port, didn't use it, and still has one of the highest levels. He's vacuums up all the equipment. He has 40,000 ventilators and all this other stuff that he never even uses, and then somehow claims victory. Is the most baffling thing I've seen, other than the fact that nobody's being like, what the hell is wrong with you? Everybody's just like going along with it and being like, oh yeah, this guy is great, he's such a good leader. What? It's obviously wrong by the data, and then all the science people claim that, oh no, he's a great leader.
Right, he's being kind of a bastard about it too. Like, if you hear how he talks about the outbreak, he just blames Trump 100%. But then if you go back to some of those old press conferences, he's often like conciliatory, being like, well, we had a good conversation with the president earlier. Like, if you go back to where the outbreak was like really bad and they were working with the that he was sort of hostage to, like, he wanted to not disrespect or offend the feds to get what he needs. Right. But it seems like he got what he needed, and he still, couldn't manage. And now he's just completely blaming the entire thing on the president, which, like, whatever, fine. You can criticize Trump's pandemic response, but just to see the guy who presided over the very worst outbreak, who clearly has a role in it, to just be such like a jerk about it, like passing off the buck and all this, it's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, like you said, he's talking about setting up this in New York City specifically, setting up this social distancing enforcement task force. And I should say too that, like, I've seen some people sort of criticizing, saying that, like, he didn't specify a number. That, like, if you go back to the press call, it's not really clear, actually. It's possible he did actually say I thought he said 3,000 to 4,000, that he was suggesting the number for the task force. But some people are arguing that he just said 34,000 people in the NYPD, and he was just talking about the whole police force, just saying, like, just citing the whole, the whole number, just say, like, they had a lot of officers on hand that could do this. And so I don't know, there is some dispute that he actually specified a number. But we are talking about, he definitely talked about some kind of NYPD task force to enforce social distancing. Because right now in New York, indoor dining is still shut down. That they've allowed people to set up sort of like tables and stuff outside, but they're closed inside. And this has been, like, devastating to the New York bars and restaurant industry. Like, I think actually just last week we had a class action lawsuit where bars and restaurants in NYC are suing for $2 billion in damages because they're just saying that like this we've been devastated by these government policies. And I think like over 1,000 eateries have gone down. And I think just in the first 3 days of September, 20 bars and restaurants went under for good permanently. And so we're seeing like, these eateries just dropping like flies out in NYC. And we still have Cuomo saying like, well, we can't quite reopen now until we get this like, social distancing enforcement squad. And, who knows how long that's going to take and how much work that's going to be to set up.
Right. Well, and then also, I've seen nobody question this, but like we have this massive movement going on right now, in part, focused on defund the police, but certainly to look at revamping the role of police and not having the police in so many confrontations. If the police are going to be showing up at every business and going around and you're not wearing a mask and you're not social distance or whatever, inciting or arresting people, that seems like you're going to put your officers in a whole lot of confrontation with people that, in the other sense, you have an entire movement like specifically out there to stop from happening. And again, like of all the things going on, it is shocking to me that nobody is just a little bit outraged about that. That we're, after we have like this whole social justice, we need to rein in the police thing. This guy is going to go send 4,000 police or however many he wants to send out there to enforce arbitrary rules around wearing a mask. And, then of course it's going to get ugly. We had this situation in Rochester, New York. You got that guy, David Perdue, right? So now you're arresting people who aren't following COVID rules. So what, you're going to be putting beds over their heads like you did David Perdue to stop the, spread of COVID? That doesn't look very good, obviously. I mean, that's, a huge part of why people are so upset about what happened to that guy. But it's because it just looked so damn ugly because they put a bag over his head before they suffocated him. So I'm not sure, like, what the hell he thinks is going to happen or why he wants to set up this task force. It's really shocking. And like, as you point out, they have all these arbitrary rules. I remember at one point I was tweeting with Bob Murphy about, whether you're allowed to have boneless wings or bone-in wings, because a boneless wing is just a chicken nugget. Is that really a meal? But bone-in wing maybe is. He said sandwiches are okay at one point, I think, which didn't make sense because you eat it with your hands. You think you want something maybe you eat with a fork and a knife so you're not sticking things in your mouth. But
right.
It's all arbitrary. It's all stupid. And so many people are blindly complying with it. Pete Quinones has been taking quite a few victory laps about saying that, people would still be wearing masks like 6 or 8 months after this thing happened. And I mean, it certainly looks like a lot of this stuff is here to stay in these arbitrary rules in New York City. And, this massive police force that I'm sure is going to be just like the one they have in Australia, running around and rounding up pregnant women for what they put on Facebook is a terrifying state. And this guy is the liberal reformer to the law and order president.
Right. That's right. So that's the situation. There's one possible saving grace here that like the city council speaker, Corey Johnson, I think the guy's name is. He's saying that like, look, we agree that we have to have some kind of, social distancing enforcement. He's like, but we don't want to use the NYPD for that, man. Like just with everything that's going on, like I think he at least recognizes the potential for that to be a disaster. So this guy might be our saving grace here. One of these city officials in New York who might get hopefully a different non-police power agency that's not going to show up with guns to maybe do this kind of inspection stuff. I would prefer they didn't do it at all, but if they're going to do it, I'd rather them not send the cops.
Right. Yeah. At least a little bit less confrontation with cops. Well, Will, is there anything we didn't cover that you had on your mind today, or is that pretty much knock it out? Of course, if you have any other like COVID updates, I'd be interested to just hear how things are going in your little area of the world, if the hospitals are overrun or if things are still locked down or how that's going.
Yeah, I gotta, so we can talk a little bit more broad COVID stuff, I think. Like, I have not certainly been following the trends as closely as I was a couple months ago in like the real peak of the outbreak during like March and April and stuff. But like, yeah, if you go and look at the graph, it does seem like we're mostly past this like spike in cases we saw over the summer. Like if you look at like the daily case numbers, it seems like they are falling. And deaths, I don't think really ever, like nationwide, deaths did not spike up with that new spike in cases, like nowhere near what the cases were suggesting. Here in Michigan, we do still have like slightly higher daily case numbers than we did earlier in the year. Like in June, I think that was like our lowest number since the outbreak began. So things are kind of falling. It looks like nationwide. However, there was one story I wanted to mention in particular that I think people should go take a look at in the New York Times actually the other day. There's been a lot of question about just like whether the testing data is accurate, whether it's giving too many false positives or false negatives, and what these numbers really mean. I mean, I know there was reports, I think in the Atlantic actually, about how the CDC is mixing its data. It started randomly mixing its like RNA testing and antibody testing. And so there's been all kinds of things that just suggest like this data is kind of weird and mixed and not that helpful. And now the Times has the story where it's kind of even further suggesting that, where they're kind of looking at the sensitivity of tests, and they're finding that a lot of tests are in the U.S. at least are finding like really, really tiny, minuscule amounts of virus, and they're being flagged as positive. And they're saying how like this at this amount, like people won't get sick from the virus and they can't pass it on. It's not contagious. And so they're questioning whether it even really is right to call that a positive test, positive like confirmed infection,
or
because
it's
of how
certainly
sensitive.
not the same thing as somebody having coronavirus in what we think it is. It's distinctly different.
Right, like it's not even so much like an asymptomatic thing, like where like you have the thing, but for some reason it's not giving you symptoms. Like you're asymptomatic because it's such a small amount of virus, it couldn't possibly make you sick, and you can't pass it on to people. And so they're saying that they went back and looked, because like the Times is sort of saying this might be an issue. And so we went back and looked at data for New York State and Massachusetts, and they found that 90% of the positive tests had that like minuscule, insignificant amount of virus in it. And so they're kind of like, that could suggest that like we're really overstating the number of infections and like infections in the sense of somebody who should be quarantining and who can pass it on to others. And so I found this Times piece to be very interesting. That this is just for 2 states they looked at, but like if you extrapolate that out, 90% is like, that's a lot of cases. That's the most of the outbreak, it seems.
Right.
And so it seems like that could be a big deal.
And they may be states that are a little bit worse on that, just because I know there are states that were hit early, and so maybe later tests have gotten better. Maybe they've gotten worse. I don't know. I also know like a big issue that I have seen with the data is that sometimes it lags, or sometimes they input like backlogged data. And so I think there was a case in Texas where like they had like a spike one day of like a bunch of cases in a county. Well, it was that like they had all these tests from May that they either didn't look at, didn't get to, or something like that, and then they reported them in June. And so like on the Johns Hopkins or the whatever world metrics that most people look at, it looked like there was a significant spike, but that doesn't reflect the accurate like what's happening on the ground there. Everybody right now is all focused on this 94% number, where that many that percentage of people had like mostly 2 or more comorbidities when they died with or of coronavirus. Now that doesn't mean that 94% of the people had a stroke, and then they test and they found a small number of coronavirus viruses and labeled it positive. But you do have to wonder, like with what you're saying, if it's just a small amount, like all these people with 2 or more comorbidities, how many of those people actually didn't even have an amount of coronavirus that was spreadable, much less that was going to be anything that could possibly kill them. And yeah, and all this is very important. Look, there's a lot of people that have had to put off significant life events, people who have missed out. You see people on Twitter say that my wife's going in for a procedure today and I can't be there with her. My wife had a baby, I couldn't be there. I'm thinking things from like a men's perspective. Somebody's mother passes away and you can't go to the funeral because you test positive, or there's not a funeral. Like that kind of stuff has happened to a lot of people. And so for getting that wrong, then that's something that people should know, because we really need to start reassessing how we're looking at this virus and reacting to it. And I mean, certainly what we're putting these kids through. The virtual learning isn't enough. People who saw the news ticker, the video feed on today's show, I have the one on there about a 12-year-old boy in Colorado getting suspended from school because his teacher saw him flash a toy gun on it. All these things are happening because of our reaction to COVID. And they may not seem all that serious, but I'm sure they're, saying a little boy brought a gun to school, that's going to stick with them for a long time. And,
Right.
it could result in a very, very long suspension from school. And just anybody out there that's listening that's a parent, schools are interpreting that as bringing a gun to school. Like they're saying
Yeah.
it's the same thing as bringing a physical gun to the building, which means they will take your kids for that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah,
just
they sent like people to his house to do police, I think, sent this to. I think it was an African American boy sent cops to his house to do a welfare check,
Mhm.
which is like, yeah, that, and saying, oh, he might have a gun or something. Like, that's a great precedent.
Right. Yeah. Little boy had I think a bow and arrow on his wall behind him. They said that was bringing a gun to school.
Right.
Just if you're a parent, be careful because the teachers are looking into like your homes now. And if they see something that they feel like they shouldn't see, they all have to like sign these things that say, yes, I will report it. If you're a teacher in almost every state, you're what's called a mandated reporter. So if you witness
Yeah.
anything that you believe is even potential abuse, you're required by law to report it. So this is creating all kinds of problems and much more serious stuff than this. But that was something I know a little bit about and want to talk about. Anyways, Will, anything else on COVID, or should we wrap it for today? And we'll have another great show for Wednesday.
No, I think I would encourage people to go check out. Maybe we can leave it in the show notes. That Times story, like
Okay.
I thought it was pretty good. The Times has done some decent work on the COVID stuff, as long as it's not real. There's no political element to it or something, and you're not talking about anonymous sources or whatever. Like, they've done some decent work, so that one's worth checking out, I think.
All right. Well, all right. Everybody, check out Will Porter on Twitter at the Will Porter. He writes for RT, has like 4 or 5 stories out a day. So usually you wake up in the morning, you could check him out on Twitter and find a whole bunch of great stuff. Then you follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. You could follow the show on Twitter at con_interest. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube feed. The show has its own iTunes feed now. We got like 10 already 5-star ratings from our fans who are so appreciative of that, and like 3 awesome
Thank you.
reviews from people. That stuff I really appreciate. It also like gives me a little bit more energy to do the show, knowing that people really like it. So if you
Yeah.
can think about doing that kind of stuff, especially why the show is brand new, the more subscribers, followers, or anything that you have, it looks more legit to people who come across it. And make sure you're checking out the video component. We're putting a lot of work into it, and I think it looks really good and adds something to the show. So, Will, unless you have anything else, we'll sign off and be back on Wednesday.
Nope. Peace, y'all.